Boys and girls, today we're going to be talking about what are percents and how do you find them. If you have watched our previous video and you've seen how we find decimals, then finding percents is very, very easy. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, some things that you're going to need to remember in order to help you find percents is that, first of all, fractions show parts to whole relationship. So taking a look at that, we have 2 green stars out of 5 altogether. So it's a relationship between number of parts to the number altogether, 2 to 5. We also need to remember that fractions show portions. So for example, the portion of green stars is 2 fifths, or 2 out of 5 altogether. So it shows a portion out of a whole. You also need to remember that decimals can show portions. So for example, the same problem can be represented as 0.4 of the stars are green. We know this is true because we remember that fractions are also division problems. And also because if I multiply 0.4 times 5, I'm going to get 2 green stars. The last fact that I just mentioned was that fractions are division problems. So if I divide 2 by 5, I'm going to get 0.4. So there's a connection between decimals and fractions. Fractions are decimals, decimals are fractions. And you can see down here in my little chart that this connection also extends to percents. So fractions are decimals and decimals are also percents. They are all part of a triangle. So let's jump into what percent means. Percent means per 100 or out of 100. Do you remember before, guys, when we were plotting fractions on hundreds charts? Here's an example of what that looks like. We have 100 altogether, and we plot a certain number of that on our hundreds chart. Here we have 25 out of 100. This is a percent. This is 25%. In other words, 25 out of 100 is shaded in. So this is also another way we can say 25 per 100, 25%. Now you'll notice too that this is out of our 100 here, 25 represents one portion. If we count all the portions that could hold 25, we would have 25, 50, 75, 100. Or in other words, there would be 4 sections of our whole, and one of those sections would be our number that we have. So we have 1 out of 4 altogether, 1/4. We learned previously that this number can also be represented as a decimal. So 1/4 can also be represented as 0.25. All of these amounts, 25 out of 100, 25%, 1/4, and 0.25, all of these amounts are exactly the same. These are all equivalent terms, okay? So let's talk about how to go from, let's say we're given a fraction like 1/4 and we get a decimal, we turn that into a decimal, 0.25. Let's talk about how to turn that into a percent. It's very, very simple. Like I said, so first of all, you're going to need to take your fraction and you're going to need to turn it into a decimal. So we remember that in order to turn a fraction into a decimal, we're going to divide the numerator by the denominator, or top number divided by the bottom number. So remember, the top number will go inside of your house. The bottom number goes outside of the house. Top number is the dividend. Bottom number is the divisor. Okay, when we do that, we find that our decimal is going to be 0.6. This is equivalent to 3/5. These are equivalent terms. The last step that we need to do is we need to find out what percent this is. So going back here on our hundreds board, 0.6, how many out of 100 is that? How many out of 100 is that? Or another way to think about it, 3 out of 5, if I divide my hundreds board into 5 sections and I take 3 of them, how many out of my 100 will I have? Well, all I need to do is multiply my decimal times 100, or do 2 jumps to the right. So if I take my decimal and I jump over 1, 2, that would be the same thing as multiplying times 100. When we do that, we get 60%. And we're all done. That's how you do it. So 3/5, the fraction, is the same thing as 0.6. The decimal is the same thing as 60%, the percent. These are all equivalent terms, okay? All right, so now it's your turn. Can you find what's missing? So if you're stuck, please rewind the video and see if you can go back and make sense of this. Go ahead and pause your video now. Try to work these out on your own, and I will reveal the answer in just a moment. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the answers. 3/4, what's the decimal? Most of you remember that that's 0.75. We divide 3 by 4, we're going to get 0.75. The question is, what's the percent? All you're going to do is multiply that number times 100 or do 2 jumps. The answer is 75%. 0.75 is our decimal, 75% is our percent. The next question, 3/8, what's the decimal? What's the percent? We're just going to create this as a division statement. We'll do 3 divided by 8. Our decimal is going to be 0.375. We do 2 jumps or multiply that times 100. We're going to get 37.5%. Yes, it is okay to have decimals as percents. No worries. And last but not least, this is a little bit trickier. If you're given the percent, can you find out what the decimal is? And also, what's the fraction? Since we must multiply times 100 or do 2 jumps to make a percent, that means we are going to have to divide by 100 to find our decimal, okay? Or do 2 jumps to the left. So we do 2 jumps, 1 jump to the left, 2 jumps to the left. We're going to get 0.8 for our decimal, 0.8, 8/10 for our decimal. And what is our fraction? 80 out of 100, 80 out of 100. Or in other words, if I had 80% of my hundreds, that would be 8 of these rows shaded in. And what is our fraction? Well, we can go ahead and simplify 80 out of 100. We can find that they both have a greatest common factor of 20. 80 divided by 20 is 4. And 100 divided by 20 is 5. The simplest term for that fraction is 4/5. Okay? So just to review, we talked a little bit about how fractions are decimals and how decimals are percentages. We talked about what those look like and how they can be represented in many different ways, and they're all equal. And we talked about the way to find them is simply to divide the numerator by denominator to find the decimal, and then to just multiply that by 100 to find our percent. And you're all done.